Hi guys, my name is Abigail White, and today I'm going to be presenting on the human papillomavirus, or HPV. So just to give a quick overview, the family of HPV is Papillomaviridae. There are several genuses. One of them is alpha papillomavirus, another is beta papillomavirus. It's small, it has an icosahedral shape, it's non-enveloped, and it has a DNA genome that is circular. And here's just a figure of what the HPV looks like. It's the most commonly transmitted STI, and typically it's going to be harmless and go away on its own, but there are some cases where it's going to lead to genital warts and even cancer. So that's why I wanted to focus on this infection, because although it can be potentially harmless, it can also be potentially life-ending. So HPV, there's over 100 types that have been discovered, and they are classified depending on how they impact the patient's health. So if they're called low risk, then they, in some cases, can cause genital warts, and there's a really low chance that it's going to cause cancer. So these are type 6 and 11. There's also high risk HPV, and this is going to more likely cause cancer in different parts of the body. And type 16 and 18 are really well studied and known to lead to cancer more often. Unfortunately, there is no cure. So with the pathogenesis, transmission occurs when there's a cut, abrasion, or tear in the skin that lets the virus enter the cells. Genital HPV is going to enter the body via direct skin-to-skin contact. Obviously, this is going to be more often through sexual intercourse. And oddly enough, you can actually get oral or upper respiratory lesions caused by oral sex. Besides sexual transmission, you can also have non-sexual transmission. So this is going to occur when the mom who's infected with HPV is going to give birth and give it to the newborn during the process. Unfortunately, this can cause warts in the child's breathing tubes, lungs, and voice box, and can cause lifelong problems. In terms of how it infects, this virus is going to go after the mucosal and keratinized epithelium. It's going to infect the basal epithelium after one of those cuts occurs. And although I'll go into this into much more detail on the next slide, it's going to stimulate the replication of the epithelial cells of the host, which is going to lead to warts. In terms of the rate, I found one study in particular that looked at heterosexual couples, and they actually found that if one person in the relationship has HPV, there's a 20% chance that their partner will be infected in 6 months. So to go into a little bit more detail of how the virus invades and lives and, replicates, the first step is going to be invading the damaged squamous epithelium and infecting the basal cells. So like I mentioned on the last slide, some kind of abrasion or cut that's going to give the virus access. After viral entry and uncoating, the HPV is going to be transported, specifically its DNA is going to be transported into the nucleus. And it's really key here that at this stage, the virus maintains low copy number and has genomic maintenance with an episome. Next, the virus is going to leave the basal cells and initiate differentiation, which unfortunately is going to help the HPV also escape the immune response. So at this stage, it's going to replicate and produce structural proteins that has to rely on the DNA replication machinery of the host because the virus does not have its own. It's also going to inactivate p53 and retinoblastoma tumor suppressors. So tumor suppressors are naturally in our bodies and help limit cell proliferation, and luckily helps limit cancer occurrence at the same time. So in this case, by inactivating that, the virus is going to reactivate cell division along with cell differentiation of the host. Once the virus makes it to the upper levels of the stratified epithelium, there's going to be gene amplification, and this is going to be to the point where there's up to thousands of copies per cell. So now the virus is going to be able to synthesize capsid proteins to form virions. So we've talked about capsids before in this class. It's just the protective sheath that viruses make. And specifically, I wanted to mention L1 because it is very key to the virus's survival and virulence and replication and just survival. And I'll touch on it a little bit more when we get to the vaccines. So the progenitor virions are going to be released, and the end outcome is that since the epithelial cells have been signaled to replicate, there's going to be hyperplasia, which is going to lead to mucosal lesions or warts on the skin. So in terms of the symptoms, 90% of individuals will show no symptom of infection. which is scary. Once individuals do show symptoms, it's usually because they have serious health problems and the infection's been going on for a while. And sometimes warts may appear. But in most cases, the immune system will actually fight the HPV infection to the point where there won't be wart formation. And when there are genital warts, like I mentioned before, it's going to be caused by HPV viruses types 6 and 11, and they're going to appear like flat lesions or cauliflower bumps, or like they have little stems protruding. Rarely they can be painful, but most of the time they're going to be itchy. So just a comparison between females and males. In females, the warts are going to mainly be near the vulva, but they can also appear near the anus, cervix, or in the vagina. In males, they're going to appear on the penis, scrotum, or near the anus. And I just thought I would include some images so you can see what they look like. I think it's also important to note that these warts can be removed just like normal warts with at-home kits, or you can go into a doctor and have them remove them by freezing them and probably have a little bit more success. So I also wanted to mention how HPV progresses in a body, specifically in females, and how that can lead to cervical cancer, since that is the worst outcome and most common bad outcome, and kind of what fighting HPV infections is all about. So most infections are going to resolve on their own. So after the initial HPV infection, you're going to see it clears up in most cases. Once it becomes persistent, though, and lasts for more than a year, it can lead to CINs, or cervical intraepithelial neoplasias, which just means new growth. And then they're going to appear like this. So right here we're talking about low-grade CINs. And luckily, most of those are going to clear up on their own as well. But when the infection is persistent for more years, getting on the other end, so maybe 5, 6, 7 years, then you can have high-grade CINs appear. And you can see that the growth is going to become more disorganized, unstructured, and just nasty looking. But also this can get cleared up too, especially if they're treated. But if they're not treated and they are persistent, even up to decades long in the body, on the cervix, it can lead to cervical cancer. And so that's what that would look like there on the cervix. So since it can cause cervical cancer and other cancers, I just thought I would briefly outline the different kind of symptoms that are characteristic of these cancers. So in cervical cancer, you could see vaginal bleeding or excessive discharge, pain during sex, or pelvic pain. With penile cancer, you can see changes in the color or thickness of the skin and painful sores. With vulvar cancer, you can see changes in the color or thickness of the skin, chronic itching or pain, and you might see a lump form. With anal cancer, there's going to be bleeding, pain, itching, or discharge, and changes in bowel habits. And with throat cancer, you could see a sore throat, consistent ear pain, trouble with swallowing or breathing, excessive weight loss, or a mass formation in the neck. So in terms of the prevalence, it is the most common STI in the United States, but I was curious how prevalent. So, and really the groups it was most prevalent in. So out of a CDC study where they looked at 18-year-olds to 59-year-olds, they found that out of those that had an HPV infection, 45% were male and 39.9% were female. Out of those individuals, those with high-risk HPV infections, 25% were male and 20% were female. And with the more rare oral HPV infection, 11% were males and 3.3% were females. So I wanted to include this graphic because although it is a little outdated from 2008, I think it is a nice comparison of HPV compared to other STIs. So you can see that HPV is clearly dominating in the highest number of cases compared to the other STIs, with 14 million. Pretty crazy. Ooh. This graphic kind of goes along with I guess I didn't mention this, but this is just new cases. In this graphic, this is a combination of new and existing cases. So in 2008, there was 79 million individuals in the US with HPV infections. This graphic I also took from the CDC, and it is just a prevalence of genital HPV in 2013 and 2014, just comparing sexes and origin. So you can see if you look at the light blue, which is male, and this kind of lime green color, which is women, that men overall have statistically more cases of HPV. In terms of race, non-Hispanic blacks have the highest, and the lowest was seen in non-Hispanic Asians. In terms of the risk factor, there are several that are going to make people more vulnerable to HPV infection. A big one is going to be sexual partner number. So the more sexual partners you have, or your partners had, the higher risk you're going to have of being exposed to HPV. Also, age is going to play a big role. So this is kind of the big age where people are infected, between 15 and 24, and they're also more likely to have warts at that age. Damaged skin is also another factor. Like we talked about, damaged skin is how this virus gets into the body, and so that's just going to make it easier for the person to get infected. Another huge one, which we've talked about in this class with other diseases, is a weakened immune system. So this could be HIV or AIDS caused from taking immune-suppressing drugs. Maybe you had a recent organ transplant. You're just going to be more likely to develop HPV because your immune system's not going to be able to fight it off. So what's the best way to battle HPV infection? Prevention. So if you're close to my age, 24 or younger, then I almost guarantee that you've had this vaccination. There are 3 recombinant vaccinations for HPV infection, and they really just vary in the number of types they protect against. And really their goal to even be created in the first place is to protect against cervical cancer. So the first is Cervarix, and it targets types 16 and 18, and it's for females. And even though it only targets 2 types, it still covers 70% of the cervical cancer cases. For Gardasil, it's a quadrivalent VLP, or viral-like particle vaccine, and it protects against both males and females. And not only does it protect against cancer, but it also protects against wart formation. For Gardasil 9, it's a nine-valent VLP. Obviously, like the name kind of hints, it's protecting against 9 types. And it also protects against cancer and warts. And what's really great about this vaccine is it actually protects against 90% of cervical cancers, which I think is amazing. So in the near future, actually, Gardasil is going to be phased out, and Cervarix is already not really that used frequently. So in the next few years, it will be only Gardasil 9 that's used, just because it is just such a great coverage. In terms of how these vaccines work, they use empty L1 caspids. If you remember from the pathogenesis, that's kind of the final structural protein that these viruses need in the human body just to be protected and survive and be able to further reproduce. And so by using empty ones and ones that won't harm you and giving it in a vaccine, your body's going to be able to target them once it's reintroduced if you get infected. And so like in Cervarix, they get the empty caspids from insect cells, while in Gardasil they use empty L1 caspids of those viral types produced in yeast cells. So pretty cool. In terms of how it's recommended, both females and males are recommended, and it's generally thought that 11 to 12-year-olds should get it. However, some organizations recommend you vaccinate as early as 9 to 10 years of age. So the whole point is to give it to children before they have any sexual contact. Otherwise, the vaccine might not be that protective or might not be effective at all. And it's generally given in 2 doses, 6 months apart, which is different from when I had it, or even a few years ago when they gave it in 3 doses. It was not a fun shot. So beyond the vaccination, if there's any kind of abnormal growth that you notice, genital warts can be diagnosed by just going into a doctor. There's actually no HPV test for men, and the only HPV tests in women are through pap smears. So you're not actually detecting the HPV directly. You're able to look at if there's any irregularities in the cells. And so women are encouraged to get a pap smear every 3 years to check for signs of cervical cancer, and it can actually reduce cervical cancer by 70%. So why is this relevant? In 2010, they estimated that there would probably be 12,000 women in the United States that were diagnosed with cervical cancer, and they estimated that over 4,000 would die of this disease. So why is this a big deal? Because if you can stop it early enough, it won't lead to cervical cancer. And although it is so harmless at first, it can really change your life and actually shorten it. And so how I actually even found out about HPV, besides getting the vaccine when I was younger, but more recently, I guess, was reminded of it, was through watching a comedian on Netflix. Her name's Ali Wong. She's hilarious if you're looking to binge something on Netflix. But she made a joke about HPV, and in further research, it seems like a lot of shows are bringing up HPV, even if it's jokingly. And what's great is I think that it's kind of reminding females or even educating them that this is a problem. And as Ali Wong put it, everybody has HPV, which a lot of people do. She's not that far off. So I think it's great, and I think that if we can continue to mention HPV in the media, even jokingly, just to start that conversation, then I think it's a great starting point to help prevent needless deaths from this infection in the future. So here's my sources, and that's it. Thank you.